Let me tell you something about nations, about empires, about diplomacy. It's a lot like personal development. Success is never an accident, and neither is failure. When relations between two great powers, like the United States and India, begin to fracture, you better believe's a cause, and sometimes it doesn't take a committee, a conference, or a war to destroy a bridge. It only takes one person, one bold decision, one truth exposed, one moment that changes the whole narrative. Now imagine this. Former U.S. President Donald Trump stands up, and what he reveals isn't just politics. It's strategy, it's betrayal, and it's a lesson in how influence works in the real world. In this message today, we're going to unpack not just what happened, but why it happened. Because success leaves clues, and so does destruction. And if you pay close attention, you'll walk away with more than just news. You'll walk away with wisdom. One person's influence can shape the destiny of nations. Truth, once revealed, if changes the balance of power. Diplomatic failure always begins with neglected principles. Strong alliances require stronger character. You can't fake respect. Nations feel it, or they don't. One person's influence can shape the destiny of nations. That's not just a poetic thought. It's a historical truth, repeated time and again across centuries. Whether it's in boardrooms, battlefields, or behind diplomatic doors, the course of nations often hinges not on the masses, but on the actions, words, and convictions of individuals. We like to think it takes armies or entire governments to change the world, but more often than not, it's one voice, one vision, one defiant stand that turns the tide. Think about how real leadership works. It doesn't scream. It doesn't always hold titles. But it carries weight. It carries clarity. And most importantly, it carries consequences. In every great shift, political, economic, cultural, you'll find a name, a face, a decision. That's how much power a single individual holds when principles guide them more than popularity, when courage drives them more than consensus. Now, when we look at the complexities of U.S.-India relations, it's tempting to reduce them to alliances, agreements, and economic data. But behind every policy is a person. Behind every handshake is a motive. And behind every fallout, there's usually a moment, often triggered by a single individual, where the truth could no longer be denied, or where conviction overruled conformity. That's where real history is written. Not in headlines, but in decisions made when the spotlight was off. You see, when one Indian stood up or spoke out, and the dynamic between two of the world's most powerful democracies shifted, we shouldn't be surprised. That's the pattern of power. That's how real influence works. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask, is this the right time? It recognizes that truth is always timely, and that silence often costs more than courage. That one individual, whether through a statement, a revelation, or an act of defiance, triggered a ripple effect that exposed hidden agendas, challenged political norms, and redefined what cooperation really means. We underestimate individual responsibility because we've been trained to think systems run the show. But systems are built and broken by people. You can have all the treaties in place, All the press conference is polished and rehearsed. And it can all come undone in a moment when one person chooses truth over tradition. That's not chaos. That's accountability, and it's one of the most powerful forces on earth. Now, the real lesson here is not political. It's personal. If one person can disrupt global alliances, imagine what you could do in your own world if you actually believed that your voice mattered. Imagine what would change if you stopped outsourcing responsibility, stopped waiting for a majority, and realized that history doesn't wait for permission. It moves with the bold. One individual with clarity and integrity is more powerful than a committee with confusion and compromise, because influence doesn't scale through noise, it scales through truth. And truth spoken by just one person, at the right time, in the right way, can unravel years of false narratives, can disrupt billions in foreign policy, and can awaken a global audience that's been sleeping under the illusion of stability. The individual who sparked this fallout between the U.S. and India didn't do it with an army. They didn't need wealth, media backing, or institutional power. They only needed conviction. They only needed the courage to stand alone, to risk backlash, and to speak what others were too afraid to say. That's what separates influencers from imitators. It's not style, it's substance. And substance always reveals itself when stakes are high. So when someone tells you that you're just one person and can't change the world, remind them that history proves otherwise. Remind them that behind every global shift, every alliance or collapse, there was always one individual who refused to stay silent. One spark that lit the fire. One whisper that broke the silence. That's what happened here. One Indian stood up, and the world had no choice but to listen. Because in the end, when the dust settles and the headlines fade, history will remember the individuals who dared to shape it. Not the crowds that stayed quiet. Not the officials who played safe. But the ones who understood the power of one and acted on it. That's real influence. And that's how destinies change. Truth, once revealed, changes the balance of power. It doesn't just sit there as a harmless fact. It acts. It disrupts. It rearranges priorities and shakes the foundation of systems built on illusion. You can delay it. You can deny it. You can suppress it for a time. But once it breaks through, it never leaves things the way it found them. That's the nature of truth. It's not passive. It's not polite. It doesn't care who's comfortable or who's powerful. It levels the field, exposes what was hidden, and reminds the world that reality always finds a way. In the world of international politics, power often rests not in what is true, but in what is believed. Perception becomes policy. Narratives become strategy. And for years, relations between nations, like the United States and India, have often been dressed in polished language and surface-level agreements, while deeper tensions simmered beneath. But the moment someone, anyone, reveals a truth powerful enough to crack that illusion, the entire dynamic shifts. Suddenly, questions arise, motives are examined, and influence begins to realign. It only takes one revelation to change everything. One piece of information, one candid statement, one leaked document, or even just one moment of honesty in a room full of actors. Because when truth shows up, it forces a response. People can't unhear it. Leaders can't ignore it. And the public can't pretend they didn't see it. That's why truth is feared by those who depend on control. Because it cannot be controlled. It's not loyal to any nation or party. It stands on its own, waiting to be discovered, and when it is, it demands action. When Donald Trump revealed something significant about the fracture in U.S. India relations, it wasn't just a headline, it was a shift. Suddenly, the mask came off. People started to see the real dynamics behind the scenes. And what followed wasn't just debate, it was disruption. Policies were re-examined. Statements were reinterpreted. Alliances were tested, because truth has that effect. It forces recalibration. It redraws the map of influence. You see, there's a reason powerful institutions fear whistleblowers. There's a reason entire teams are paid to manage optics and maintain public narratives, because they know that perception is power. But once truth interrupts that perception, once it enters the room unified, no PR campaign can hold it back. The truth doesn't need to be popular to be powerful. It just needs to be real. And the impact goes far beyond governments. When people see the truth about what really happens behind closed doors, when they see what their leaders are really prioritizing, it creates a shift in collective awareness. It empowers the citizen. It removes the blindfold. It calls people out of apathy and into accountability. Because once the public sees what's been concealed, they begin to question not just this situation, but everything they were told before. That's when change begins, not just in offices and embassies, but in minds. The beauty and terror of truth is that it doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care how long you've been in power. It will expose your inconsistencies, your contradictions, your hidden agendas, if you built them on falsehood. And when someone with a platform, like a former president, chooses to unveil even a portion of that truth, they don't just stir controversy, they create clarity. They shine a light in dark places, and suddenly people stop nodding along and start asking hard questions. This kind of truth-telling doesn't just upset the powerful. It empowers the ordinary, because it shows them that even the most polished agreements can be built on shaky ground. It reminds them that their voices matter. That leadership is not about hiding the truth, but standing in it. That diplomacy is not about illusion, but integrity. And that no matter how tightly information is controlled, the truth has a way of surfacing through people who are willing to risk something to reveal it. So when someone says, it's just a statement, or just politics, they're missing the weight of what truth actually does. It's not just about facts, it's about power. Because once a truth is revealed, those who built their strength on denial feel the tremor. Those who stood in honesty stand taller. And those who've been asleep wake up. That's the power of a moment of truth. It's not just spoken, it's felt. And once it's felt, nothing is ever the same again. Diplomatic failure always begins with neglected principles. Not sudden, not accidental, not surprising, just quietly ignored truths that, over time, erode the foundation of trust and stability between nations. The collapse of any alliance, any long-standing relationship between two global powers doesn't start with headlines or public confrontations. It starts in silence, in compromise, in the small moments when principles are traded for convenience, when values are sacrificed for temporary advantage. And by the time the world notices the fracture, the damage is already done. At the heart of diplomacy is integrity. It's not just about shaking hands or signing agreements. It's about shared understanding, mutual respect, and the commitment to act not only in interest, but in truth. When leaders abandon the principles that made those relationships possible, honesty, accountability, transparency, they create a void. And nature, as well as geopolitics, hates a vacuum. That void doesn't remain empty. It gets filled with suspicion, resentment, miscommunication, and eventually division. Take any major diplomatic fallout in history and trace it backward. If you won't just find policy disagreements or trade disputes, you'll find promises broken. You'll find expectations unmet. And more often than not, you'll find that someone chose power over principle. That someone decided it was easier to manipulate than to respect. That's where the rot begins. Not in global summits, but in the human decisions made behind closed doors. Nations don't fall out of alignment all at once. The break is gradual. One ignored commitment here, one dishonest communication there, and slowly trust withers. It's like a bridge designed to withstand storms, but ignored when the first cracks appear. Without maintenance, without attention to what holds it together, it collapses under pressure. And when it does, everyone asks, what happened? But the truth is, what happened started long before anyone noticed. In the relationship between the United States and India, those principles mattered deeply. Both nations stood on the idea of democracy, mutual benefit, a strategic cooperation. But even the strongest alliances cannot survive when those ideas become slogans rather than standards. If respect becomes conditional, if honesty becomes optional, and if national interest becomes an excuse to manipulate instead of collaborate, then no amount of diplomacy will hold. Because diplomacy built on broken principles is diplomacy in name only. And that's where leaders come in. Because it's not just nations that neglect principles. It's individuals in positions of power. People who choose to look the other way when integrity becomes inconvenient. People who assume that public perception is more important than private character. That's when failure begins. The moment a leader stops asking, is this right? And starts asking, can we get away with it? That's the moment diplomacy starts to rot. When Donald Trump revealed truths about the deteriorating relationship with India, it exposed more than strategy. It exposed neglect. It revealed the consequences of looking away for too long, of ignoring warning signs, of thinking the relationship could endure without the care and honesty it was built on. Because you can only coast so far on momentum. Eventually, reality catches up. In international relations, principles are like gravity. You can fight them for a while. You can pretend they don't matter, but they always pull things back into alignment or force a crash when they're denied. Principles are what anchor nations in cooperation. Without them, all you have is performance. All you have is posturing, sound bites, temporary wins with long-term costs. And when one person finally speaks up, when they point out that these principles were left behind, it doesn't cause the breakdown, it reveals it. The failure didn't begin with the speech. It began years earlier in the small moments of silence, the quiet betrayals, the decisions that no one thought would matter. But they always matter. Because trust, once eroded, doesn't return with good intentions. It returns with action. And it takes time, consistency, and courage to rebuild. So whenever we talk about the collapse of diplomacy or the breakdown of alliances, we shouldn't start with the aftermath. We should ask, when did we stop protecting the principles that held us together? When did we start prioritizing image over integrity? Because when we answer those questions honestly, we'll understand not just what happened, but why. And only then can we begin the work of building something real again. Strong alliances require stronger character. That's the truth nobody likes to say out loud, because it puts the responsibility on people, not policies, not treaties, not written agreements or diplomatic handshakes. At the center of every successful alliance, whether between individuals, corporations, or nations, is character. That rare quality of being consistent when no one's watching, of doing what's right, even when it's not profitable, of honoring commitments, not because you're forced to, but because your word actually means something. In global politics, alliances are spoken about in strategic terms. Shared interests, mutual defense, economic cooperation. But underneath all of that, the real glue holding it together is trust. And trust doesn't come from ambition. It comes from character. Without that, everything else is just temporary alignment. And temporary alignment is vulnerable. It unravels the moment a crisis shows up, or when political winds shift, or when one side decides the deal isn't convenient anymore. That's not partnership. That's opportunism. You don't build alliances on charm. You build them on integrity. Leaders of strong nations don't need to be perfect, but they must be grounded. Grounded in values that transcend the immediate situation. Because situations change. Economics fluctuate, power rises and falls. But character is the constant. It's what lets you weather the storm, hold the line, and keep your commitments even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. Look at history and you'll see it. The most enduring alliances weren't based on fear or advantage. They were based on shared principles and the strength of character to uphold them. And when those alliances broke down, it wasn't because of lack of need or relevance. It was because someone stopped showing up with integrity. Someone chose manipulation over honesty. Someone decided their personal or political gain was more important than the values the relationship was built on. That's how partnerships dissolve. Not with explosions, but with erosion. In the case of U.S. India relations, there's a long history of cooperation, challenge, and recalibration. But for that alliance to thrive in a world as complex as this one, both sides need more than strategy. They need moral discipline. Leaders must be bigger than their agendas. They have to be strong enough to tell the truth, admit missteps, and prioritize the long game over short-term optics. That kind of strength doesn't come from popularity polls or media spins. It comes from inner clarity, the kind you develop over years of standing for something that doesn't bend with pressure. When Donald Trump made statements that peeled back the layers of diplomacy and revealed cracks in the relationship, it didn't just raise political questions. It exposed character questions. Who stood up when things went wrong? Who took responsibility? Who was willing to say, "We were wrong," or "This needs to change"? That's where real leadership shows up. And that's what sustains real alliances. It's easy to be allies when things are easy, when economies are growing, when interests line up. But the true test is what happens when things get hard, when national interests conflict, when elections threaten stability, when public opinion turns. Do the leaders stay the course? Do they protect the integrity of the relationship? Or do they run for cover, throw blame, and pretend the alliance was never that important to begin with? Because what they do in those moments, that's the character test. And it's in those moments that the future of the alliance is decided. People often ask, what went wrong? When international relationships fall apart. But the better question is, who stopped leading with character? That's the moment everything started to shift. That's when the strength of the relationship was truly tested and failed. Because power without principles eventually collapses under its own weight. Influence without integrity becomes manipulation. And diplomacy without character is just theater. The world is watching these alliances more than ever. In an age of global uncertainty, where misinformation's fast and leadership's pressure is questioned at every turn, the nations that will endure are the ones that put character first. That means having leaders who are not just clever, but courageous. Not just strategic, but sincere. Who say what they mean, follow through, and can be trusted even when no one's looking. Because at the end of the day, it's not the words spoken at press conferences that hold alliances together. It's the actions taken in silence, the respect maintained in private, the courage to honor your partner even when it's not easy. That's what builds something real. That's what earns loyalty. That's what lasts. Strong alliances don't survive on convenience. They survive on character. And the stronger the character, the more unshakable the alliance. You can't fake respect. Nations feel it or they don't. Just like people, countries recognize sincerity when they see it. They know the difference between words meant to impress and actions rooted in truth. In international relations, as in life, respect isn't given because of size, status, or history. It's earned through behavior, decisions, and consistency. And once it's lost, it's not easily recovered. Respect is not about flattery. It's not about pretending to like someone or smiling in front of cameras. It's about how you treat a country when there's nothing to gain. It's what you do when they're not in the room. It's the policies you push, the priorities you set, and the tone you use when you talk about them to your people and the world. Countries, like individuals, know when they're being used. They know when they're being dismissed. They can tell when cooperation is genuine and when it's just a political move. When leaders fake respect, they may gain temporary applause, but they lose the very trust that holds diplomatic relationships together. You can't build a long-term alliance on manipulation or charm. Sooner or later, the mask slips. Sooner or later, the truth catches up. And when it does, the damage is deeper than a disagreement. It's personal, because respect, once broken, changes everything. The U.S. India relationship has always had layers. Cooperation, competition, cultural exchange, strategic maneuvering. But the one thing that has always mattered more than economics or defense is mutual respect. India, a nation with a proud civilization stretching back thousands of years, doesn't respond well to being patronized. And the United States, a nation built on the ideals of independence and freedom, doesn't respond well to being ignored. Both countries have earned their places on the world stage. Neither is looking for validation, but both demand respect. That's why when one side, even subtly, begins to treat the other as less than, the relationship shifts. It might not happen overnight. The smiles may remain. The trade deals may continue. But underneath it all, something cracks. Trust becomes thinner. Cooperation becomes conditional. And when a moment of crisis hits, that's when the lack of respect shows up the loudest. Because in the moment you need real unity, you discover it was never there to begin with. What Donald Trump revealed wasn't just about a disagreement or political stance. It pointed to a deeper truth. Somewhere along the way, respect had been eroded. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. It's in the way leaders speak to each other. The decisions made without consultation. The subtle tones of superiority that creep into policies. The unspoken belief that one side is more important than the other. These things don't just affect leaders. They affect people. They affect how citizens view each other. They affect how future partnerships are negotiated. Because when one side feels disrespected, they don't forget. Real respect isn't shown during peace. It's tested during disagreement. How you handle tension. How you respond to criticism. Whether you listen or dismiss. That's when the character of a nation shows. It's not hard to be polite when everything's going well. But when your interests diverge, when pressure builds, when the media is watching, that's when real respect is revealed. And here's the thing, respect isn't weakness. It doesn't mean agreeing with everything. It doesn't mean giving in. It means treating the other side as equal, as valuable, as sovereign. It means recognizing that your partner has their own interests, their own pride, and their own priorities. And if you want a relationship that lasts, you have to honor that. When leaders fake respect, they gamble with the future. Because eventually, the other side will walk away. They'll find new partners. They'll build new alliances, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. No country wants to be someone's project. No country wants to be tolerated. They want to be valued. And if they're not, they move on, quietly, firmly, and permanently. That's the reality behind diplomacy. It's not just strategy. It's psychology. It's emotional intelligence. It's knowing that behind every nation are people with pride, with memory, and with limits. Once you cross those limits, once you show that your respect was just a tactic, the damage is done. You can't fake respect, not for long. Nations feel it. And they respond with distance, with defiance, or with silence. But they never forget. And if you want peace, partnership, and progress, you start by being real. Because authenticity builds trust. And trust is the only thing stronger than power. So now you've seen the pattern, the deeper current beneath the headlines. This wasn't just about a fractured alliance or one controversial statement. This was about the hidden architecture of power, influence, and truth. One Indian voice disrupted an entire diplomatic illusion. One revelation from Donald Trump pulled back the curtain, and what it exposed was not a simple misunderstanding, but a long-standing neglect of the very principles that hold global partnerships together. Because when truth surfaces, it shakes the room. When principles are ignored, failure becomes inevitable. And when character is missing from leadership, even the strongest alliances fall. You can't build trust with tactics. You can't fake respect and expect loyalty. And you can't silence the individual when that voice carries the weight of clarity. This moment between the U.S. and India isn't the end. It's a turning point. A moment of reckoning, a reset. It's where nations must choose what they really stand for. Not what looks good on paper, but what's actually practiced behind closed doors. This is the price of ignoring the truth and the power of confronting it. Because in the end, history doesn't remember the noise. It remembers the courage, the integrity, the rare voices that refuse to pretend. That stood alone. That exposed what was broken so something better could be built. And that is where real transformation begins.